You ever think about what would happen if God had to sit through a regular corporate job interview? I mean, not the big dramatic, end-of-time judgment stuff. No thrones, no harps, no lightning bolts. Just a folding chair, a desk, and some nervous HR lady with a clipboard. Picture him in a waiting room, filling out a job application next to some guy who used to manage a Taco Bell. That's already funny. Now here's the first thing, the resume. That's where the whole plan falls apart, because you know damn well God's resume would be a disaster. HR people don't like vague stuff. They want bullet points, clear achievements, dates, references. They want to know what you did, when you did it, who you did it for, and preferably with numbers. And what does God hand them? Infinite experience. Skills include omnipotence, omniscience, omnipresence. That's not a resume. That's just showing off. Try handing that to a hiring manager. They'll look at it and go, okay, but what exactly did you do at your last job? And then he's stuck because he can't say, well, I created everything. That sounds like the guy who writes and made the universe better under accomplishments. Too vague. HR doesn't like everything. You've got to break it down. What were your deliverables? How did you create everything? Was it on time, under budget? Did you have a Gantt chart? Was there a project manager? You know HR would ask, can you walk us through your process? And he'd be like, at first there was nothing. Then I said, let there be light. And HR is like, okay, but was that agile or more waterfall methodology? And then they'll notice he doesn't even list dates. That resume just says in the beginning. That's not a date. You can't just write in the beginning where the employment period goes. What the hell is that? January? Fiscal cone? They want month and year. They want to know if there are gaps. And oh boy, God's got some gaps. Because he's got a creation of the universe. And then, what? Silence. A couple thousand years where he didn't show up at all. No check-ins, no emails, no quarterly reviews. That's a giant hole in your work history. You ever try to explain a 2-year gap on your resume? HR looks at you like you've been in prison. Imagine explaining 2000. And let's be honest, his titles don't even sound real. Almighty. A Lord of Hosts. I am that I am. That's not a job title. That's a bad tattoo. A real resume has stuff like assistant manager, project lead, a senior analyst. Nobody ever got hired at Deloitte because their last title was Alpha and Omega. You put Alpha and Omega on a resume, HR is going to think you worked at a vape shop. And then references. Oh man, can you imagine who he'd list for references? A C. Moses, C. Abraham, C. Job. These guys don't even have LinkedIn accounts, and Moses, let's face it, had a sketchy background. Pharaoh would be like, yeah, don't call him, he murdered a guy. Job. Yeah. That poor bastard would give the worst reference ever. Oh, him? Yeah, he tested me by killing my whole family and giving me boils. 10 out of 10 would not recommend as a boss. And don't even get me started on his resume formatting. You know, be written in stone. 2 tablets, no font, no margins. You can't even feed that into an applicant tracking system. The poor HR intern tries to scan it into the computer. The thing just says error. Material not supported. And God's sitting there like, well, it worked for commandments. And you know HR people, they hate resume padding. They don't like exaggeration. If you say you speak 3 languages, they'll test you. If you say you're proficient in Excel, they'll ask you to make a pivot table. And this guy comes in saying he's omniscient. Really? So you know everything? Okay, quick test. What's Brenda from accounting's Wi-Fi password? If you can't answer that, you're not getting the job. They'll ask him to prove his skills. You say you can walk on water. Great, we've got a fountain out front. Show us. And then there's the issue of accomplishments. Resumes need numbers. Increased revenue by 25%. And manage the team of 12. That's what HR wants. But what's God gonna write? A flooded 100% of Earth's population. He turned one guy's wife into salt. That doesn't sound like leadership. That sounds like terrorism. You put that under accomplishments, HR is calling security. And remember, every resume has that objective section. You know what it would say? To glorify myself forever. That's not a career objective, that's a cult. The interviewer would be like, or we're looking for a candidate who wants to grow with the company. And he's like, no, the company grows with me. Not a great fit. And when they finally sit down with him, you know the first thing HR can ask? So why did you leave your last job? And what's he gonna say? Well, I didn't really leave. I've just been around. Around? That's not an answer. Sounds like the guy who got fired but refuses to admit it. Oh yeah, I left to pursue other opportunities. Sure you did. And what about recent experience? Because let's be honest, most of the big projects on his resume are ancient history. Creation, Noah, Exodus, that's all Old Testament stuff. Imagine trying to land a job today with your last big project dated 2,000 years ago. HR not impressed. They're like, so what have you been up to lately? And he's like, well, I did some part-time miracle work in Lourdes, answered a few prayers in traffic jams, kept the Pope employed. That's freelance. That doesn't count. And here's the killer. Every resume has to pass the would you hire this guy as your boss test. And with God, the answer is no. Because he looks like that guy who takes all the credit when things go right and none of the blame when things go wrong. You know the type. If the company hits record profits, appraise me. If the whole company goes bankrupt, well, that's mysterious ways. That's not management, that's gaslighting. So yeah, God doesn't even make it past the resume screen. Forget the interview, he's not getting a call back. The HR computer would flag it with one of those little red notes. A candidate unqualified. Work history unverifiable. Skills exaggerated. References unresponsive. In other words, thanks but no thanks. Because if there's one thing corporate America hates, it's someone who thinks they're God. So let's say somehow, against all odds, God actually makes it past the resume stage. Don't ask me how. Maybe the HR software glitched. Maybe the recruiter was drunk. Maybe they just thought, hey, this guy calls himself almighty. Let's see if he's got management potential. Fine. He gets to the next step, the performance review. This is where it gets ugly. Because in any job, the interview is nice, it's fluffy, it's all to tell me about yourself, and where do you see yourself in 5 years? But the real meat comes in the review. That's when they sit you down, look at your record and ask, what exactly have you done here, and why do you keep screwing everything up? And God, oh boy, his review would be brutal. Picture him sitting across from two stiff shoe managers in matching suits, sipping bottled water, flipping through their clipboards. Okay, let's evaluate some of your past work. It says here you once managed an entire planet. Tell us about that. And he's like, well, I created humans in my image. And HR is nodding politely, writing down notes. And then they hit it with yes, but we also see a lot of complaints filed by those same humans. Something about plagues, floods, locusts, mass extinction events, and God's just shrugging like a kid caught with crayons on the wall. Well, you know, sometimes things get out of hand. Out of hand, you wiped out everyone with a flood. That's not a slip-up, that's not a clerical error, that's not forgetting to CC someone on an email. That's genocide. HR is not going to be cool with genocide. And that flood, let's talk about it. You're running a company, you don't like the way things are going, you don't just drown the entire staff and start over with 2 interns in a boat. Imagine Amazon doing that. Jeff Bezos walks into the warehouse. You guys aren't efficient enough. Screw it. I'm drowning all of you. Except Dave and his pet raccoon. They're going to rebuild the company. That's not management, that's psychosis. And then they'd bring up the plagues. Oh yeah, remember Egypt? God's idea of conflict resolution was, well, let's unleash frogs, lice, hail, boils, and then kill all the firstborn. That's not leadership, that's a bad acid trip. Can you imagine explaining that in a performance review? So what did you do to resolve this labor dispute? Oh well, I thought I'd cover the land in locusts and murder their children. That's not in the employee handbook. There's a section on teamwork, diversity, harassment prevention, but nowhere does it say, in case of conflict, kill their kids. And then there's Sodom and Gomorrah. HR is flipping through the file. So it says here you destroyed 2 entire cities. And he's like, yeah, they were being wicked. Wicked? That's your reason? Look, HR deals with performance issues all the time. Late to work, missed deadlines, too many smoke breaks. Nobody handles it by dropping fire and brimstone on the office. That's not discipline. That's arson. And don't even get me started on the way he delegates. Because part of the review is always, how do you manage your team? And God's team is angels. Sounds cool, right? Except they're the most unreliable middle managers in history. Half of them are singing all day, the other half fell from grace and started their own rival company. That's not delegation, that's dysfunction. And he's just sitting there in the performance review going, well, you know, free will. Yeah, free will doesn't excuse bad management. If your assistant screws up every spreadsheet, you don't get to say, well, I gave him free will. No, you train him. And then there's the issue of customer service, because that's the big metric in every review. How do the customers feel? And let's be real. Humanity is the customer. The review panel would be like, so how do your clients feel about you? And he's like, well, they praise me every Sunday. Really? Because the complaint box is overflowing. People are praying for help every day. Fix my marriage, cure my cancer, help me find parking. And half the time the response is silence. That's not customer service, that's Comcast. Oh, you prayed? We'll get back to you in 5 to 7 business eternities, and the miracles, oh boy. Let's put those under the microscope. Turning water into wine, that's one miracle. It's one miracle. Great. Helpful at parties, but not exactly scalable. Feeding 5,000 with a few loaves and fishes. Okay, impressive catering, but where was that during Worldhood? You healed a couple blind guys and a leper or two. That's wonderful, but a performance review isn't about one-off gestures, it's about consistency. HR gonna say, so you cured blindness once. Why not make it policy? Why not cure all blindness? Why are you picking and choosing? That's favoritism. And favoritism is a big HR red flag. And let's be honest, his performance review would drag in the New Testament too. They'd go, hey, so your son came down and worked under you for a while. Tell us about that project. And he's like, oh, well, it didn't go so well. They nailed him to a cross. Eyebrows shoot up. So a direct report was executed on the job? That's not a project, that's a lawsuit. OSHA would have a field day with that one. Employee safety, F-Fed. And the big issue, accountability. That's the number one thing HR looks for in a review, own your mistakes. And God never does. If something good happens, he takes credit. I blessed you. If something bad happens, it's your fault. You sinned, or it's Satan's fault. Or it's a mysterious ways, that's the oldest dodge in the book. Imagine a manager at work doing that. Oh, boss, the server crashed. In mysterious ways. Oh, boss, the shipment didn't arrive. Satan, that's not accountability, that's passing the buck. And he's got this weird obsession with loyalty metrics. Every performance review has a section on employee engagement. HR would ask, so how do you measure engagement? And God's like, I demand constant worship, singing, kneeling, praising. And if they don't, eternal damnation. That's not engagement, that's hostage taking. A real manager motivates through inspiration, not threats of hellfire. Imagine a boss saying, hey, look, you better clap at the end of this PowerPoint or you're fired forever. That's not healthy workplace culture. And let's not forget overtime. God invented the Sabbath, 1 day off a week. 1 day. That's not work-life balance, that's medieval. And he didn't even give vacation time. He's like, you can rest when you're dead. That's not a benefit, that's a threat. Every review would mark that down under a poor employee satisfaction. So yeah, you stack all that up. Floods, plagues, favoritism, bad delegation, lousy communication, zero accountability. And this performance review is going south fast. HR filling out the form. His strengths, creative, innovative. Weaknesses, genocidal tendencies, poor communication, inconsistent follow. Through, refuses to accept criticism, demands worship. Overall rating does not meet expectations. And the kicker is, you know what HR would do at the end? They'd say, oh, we're putting you on a performance improvement plan. A PIP, and he'd hate that. Because God doesn't do improvement plans. He thinks he's already perfect. You can't improve perfection, right? Wrong. Because according to HR, if you can't improve, you can't stay. That's the rule. You've got 90 days to shape up or ship out. 90 days to prove you can manage humanity without mass murder, without boils, without lightning bolts. And you know what? He wouldn't make it. He'd get fired before the second month was over. Because let's face it, no matter how divine you think you are, if your performance review looks like his, you're out of a job. So imagine we're at the part of the interview where they test your communication skills, because every job now wants excellent communication skills. That's on every posting. They all say it. I must be a strong communicator, both verbal and written. And you know what that means. Can you send an email without sounding like a lunatic? Can you explain something in less than 5 paragraphs? And can you sit in a meeting without confusing everybody? That's it. That's the bar. Now picture God sitting there being asked, well, so tell us, how do you usually communicate with your team? And he goes, well, I like to use burning bushes, cryptic dreams, thunder from the sky, and riddles nobody understands until 2,000 years later. You're not passing the communication skills test with that answer. No way. HR wants clear, concise, timely. They want bullet points and memos. They don't want poetry carved into stone tablets in a dead language. That's not communication. That's performance art. Think about it. Every manager in a company has to send out emails like a reminder. Meeting at 10, bring your reports. Simple, clear, done. God, his email would be a thunderbolt through the office ceiling that says, thou shalt be in conference room B, lest ye perish. Not exactly approachable. That's a hostile work environment right there. And then the vagueness. He loves being vague. He never gives straight answers. You ask him a yes or no question, he gives you a parable. Hey boss, should I take this job in Nineveh? And instead of saying yes or no, he tells you a story about a whale and a runaway prophet and leaves you to figure it out. That's not an answer. That's gaslighting with metaphors. Can you imagine a boss doing that? Hey, should I go with option A or option B? Oh well. Imagine 2 sons, one who worked hard and one who wasted his money. Dude, I just asked if I should use Excel or Google Sheets. And he's inconsistent. Sometimes he whispers. Sometimes he thunders. Sometimes he doesn't say anything at all. Communication's supposed to be reliable. You need to know when the meeting is, not sit around wondering if your boss is going to show up in a dream. Imagine trying to run a company like that. So what's the deadline? Wait for a vision. That's not project management, that's schizophrenia. And don't even get me started on the burning bush. That's not communication, that's a fire hazard. You're supposed to convey information, not start a forest fire. Moses didn't need special effects, he needed directions. Turn left at the Red Sea, go 3 miles, stop when you hit Canaan. Simple. But no, God has to turn it into a pyrotechnics show. Imagine if your boss did that every time they needed to talk to you. You walk into the office, the ficus tree is on fire, and the tree says, update the quarterly report. That's not communication, that's trauma. And the written stuff? Oh, man. He gives 10 commandments carved in stone. Stone! That's not a memo, that's a tombstone. You can't edit it, you can't update it, you can't even fax it. You think HR wants stone tablets in the file cabinet. They want PDF, they want Google Docs. They want stuff they can track. If you handed your manager a chunk of granite with the "Don't Kill People" scratched on it, they'd send you straight to it. And look at the contradictions. The Bible is supposed to be his employee handbook, right? Well, it's the worst handbook ever written. Half of it contradicts the other half. One page says, thou shalt not kill. The next page he's commanding armies to slaughter entire villages. That's not clear communication. That's mixed signals. Imagine an employee handbook that says, the casual Fridays wear jeans. Then the next page says, anyone wearing jeans will be burned alive. That's not policy, that's chaos. And what about accessibility? Good communication should be accessible to everyone. God only spoke to a few chosen people. Moses gets a bush. Paul gets a vision. Everyone else, nothing. That's not inclusive, that's favoritism again. If your boss only answers Janet's emails and ignores the rest of the team, you'd call HR. That's toxic. And half the time he's late. You pray, you wait, nothing. Weeks, months, silence. That's ghosting. God invented ghosting. You think Tinder invented it? No, he did. You send a message, you pour your heart out, and he leaves you on read for eternity. That's not communication, that's abuse. And when he does finally say something, it's usually impossible to understand. He's like that boss who uses way too much corporate jargon. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. What does that even mean in practice? Do the meek get dental? Is there a 401k with that inheritance? Or the first shall be last and the last shall be first? That's not clarity, that's a puzzle. Imagine a manager sending that in an email. Our Q4 results will be last. But actually first, unless you're meek, in which case inherit the earth. Nobody's passing that PowerPoint presentation. And tone, let's talk about tone. Communication isn't just words, it's tone. And his tone swings from loving father to psychotic dictator with no middle ground. One day, it's I love you more than sparrows. The next, it's obey me or burn forever. That's not good communication, that's emotional whiplash. You want consistency from leadership, not mood swings. And feedback, oh man, feedback, communication is a two-way street. Every review says that. Do you listen to your employees? And he doesn't. You can yell, scream, cry, beg, half the time, nothing. If he does respond, it's a my ways are higher than your ways. That's not feedback, that's a brush off. Imagine asking your boss, can I get a raise? And they say, my ways are higher than your ways. That's not an answer, that's corporate bullshit. And then there's the whole speaking in tongues thing. That's not communication, that's gibberish. Clear communication is the foundation of teamwork. If your company meeting suddenly devolves into everyone babbling nonsense and calling it divine, HR shutting that down fast. And how about over-communication? Because he's guilty of that too. Ever read Leviticus? That's 50 pages of rules about goat sacrifices, menstrual cycles, and mildew. Nobody needs that level of detail. That's like a boss who writes a 600-page email about stapler policy. Brevity is the soul of wit, man. Just say, keep it clean and move on. So yeah, you put all this together and God bombs the communication skills test. He's vague, late, inconsistent, overly dramatic, contradictory, exclusionary, impossible to follow, terrible at feedback, and sometimes he doesn't show up at all. That's not communication, that's chaos with reverb. And the HR panel would write it down in the notes. A candidate demonstrates passion but fails to communicate effectively with team members. Relies on cryptic metaphors, outdated mediums, and dramatic displays instead of clear, concise instructions. Overall, not a strong communicator. And that's why he's not getting the job. Because in the modern workplace, if you can't communicate, you can't lead. So here's the final test in any interview, the one nobody talks about but everybody knows is the real deal breaker, the culture fit. Because it doesn't matter how good your resume looks, it doesn't matter if you can juggle numbers or split atoms or walk on water. If you don't vibe with the culture, you're not getting the job. And God, oh man, this guy's the worst culture fit in history. He'd tank it in 5 minutes. You know what companies love now? Inclusive, approachable, flexible. That's the buzz. They want someone who's a team player, someone who listens, someone who adapts. And then God walks in, slams his fist on the table and says, it's my way or eternal damnation. Yeah, good luck fitting into the collaborative environment. You don't get to call yourself a team player if your only strategy is to worship me forever, or I set you on fire. That's not collaboration. That's a hostage negotiation. Picture him at the orientation meeting. Everyone's introducing themselves. Hi, I'm Karen. I'm in marketing. I love hiking. Hi, I'm Steve. I'm in accounting. I play guitar. Then it's his turn. I'm God. I created everything. I demand absolute obedience, and if you cross me, you're toast. Everyone else is like, oh, cool. Welcome aboard. Meanwhile, HR is already circling and not a good fit. And think about the little things. Every workplace has casual Fridays, pizza parties, happy hours. They do it to lighten the mood, build morale. God doesn't do casual. God doesn't do pizza. God's idea of team bonding is fasting for 40 days in the desert while listening to commandments. That's not a party, that's hazing. He's the guy who shows up at karaoke night and says, who knows singing? Only hymns in Latin. You can't put that guy in the break room. He kills the vibe. And then there's flexibility. Modern companies want you to be open to feedback, willing to change, willing to adapt. God doesn't adapt. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. That sounds poetic. But in a workplace, that's just stubborn. Imagine pitching a new idea in a meeting. Hey, boss, what if we try a different approach? And he's like, no. My plan is eternal and cannot be altered. That's not leadership. That's dictatorship. Every idea meeting ends with because I said so. You don't innovate in that environment, you just quit. And diversity? Forget it. Every company brags about diversity now. They put it on the website. Oh, we celebrate all voices, all perspectives. God's record on diversity is shaky at best. You read his handbook, it's all one tribe, one chosen people, everyone else is doomed. That's not diversity, that's favoritism. Imagine HR looking at the notes. A candidate seems committed to equity, except for the part where he divides everyone into sheep and goats and burns the goats. That's not exactly what they mean by inclusive workplace. And don't even bring up his attitude toward women. Companies now are bending over backwards to make sure women are respected, given equal opportunities leadership roles. God's handbook has stuff like, wives, obey your husbands. HR reads that and goes, nope, lawsuit waiting to happen. You put that attitude in a modern office, you're not just failing culture fit, you're getting dragged to HR by 3 p.m. on day one. And the company values, this is the funniest part. Every company has a list of values on the wall. Integrity, teamwork, innovation, respect, God's list. Jealousy, wrath, vengeance, eternal praise. Those are not values you put on a poster with stock photos of smiling employees. Imagine walking into a company lobby and seeing that. Welcome to Divine Enterprises. Our core values are jealousy and wrath. You'd run. Now let's talk about open door policy. Every good workplace says, we have an open door policy. Feel free to bring concerns to leadership. God doesn't have an open door policy. He has a throne surrounded by fire, lightning, and 4 weird-looking creatures with wings and eyeballs all over their bodies. You can't just walk in and say, hey, I think the toe policy is unfair. You'd be vaporized before you finish the sentence. That's not open door. That's a stay the hell away unless summoned. And you know what else? Company perks. Oh yeah, that's a huge part of culture. Free snacks, gym memberships, beanbag chairs, God's perks are the opposite. He's like, follow me, and you'll get suffering, persecution, maybe a crown in heaven when you're dead. That's not a benefits package. That's a pyramid scheme. People want dental, not damnation. Nobody's filling out the Glassdoor review with our pros, eternal life cons. Eternal suffering if you mess up. And speaking of Glassdoor, can you imagine his reviews? In management style, unpredictable, sometimes generous, sometimes genocidal, no clear advancement path. Job security questionable. One wrong move and you're banished forever. Would not recommend to a friend. That's a 1-star company right there. And then there's team building. Every company does some goofy team building exercise. Ropes course, trust falls, escape rooms. God's version of a team building exercise is making Abraham prove his loyalty by almost killing his son. That's not team building, that's a felony. Try explaining that to HR. So what's your approach to leadership development? Well, I like to traumatize employees until they obey me blindly.